Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is who won and who lost in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, or better, between Israel and Gaza. People should already know that Israel was not just confronting Hamas, but Islamic Jihad and a host of other smaller groups, like the Palestine Resistance Committees, and even ISIS. I actually saw a YouTube video posted by ISIS of people in Gaza shooting their rockets into Israel. ISIS shooting against Israel in the middle of Gaza itself. So they're there. ISIS is even there. So but the question is, again, who won and who lost? Now that a long-term ceasefire has been reached between Gaza and Israel, people have been asking a lot of different questions about this. The obvious and most often question is, how long will the ceasefire last? But that question about who won and who lost is still there, hanging. And it's important to begin to answer it. The issue of victory is important because one needs to feel good about victory on either side. So I have three answers. Answer number one is that Israel delivered an impressive and significant blow to Hamas. However, when you listen to Hamas and Iran, you hear a very different story. Hamas says that they accomplished something that no other Arab army has ever done. They sent tens of thousands of Israelis into retreat, abandoning their homes, and did not come back until Hamas allowed them to return. Hamas also continues. Remember, this is Hamas's voice speaking. They continue by claiming that many Israelis are so afraid that thousands are even refusing to return to their homes even during the ceasefire. Hamas also asserts that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, supposedly the great mighty Israeli army, was incapable of stopping or even slowing down their launching of rockets and mortars, the ones that they were sending into Israel daily. In fact, they say, on the day just before the ceasefire, when Israel was bragging about having won the operation, Hamas responded by launching well over 160 rockets into Israel, more than on any other single day. So that's an important note, and that's what Hamas and Iran are saying. Answer number two is, if you ask Hamas, they say they won because they were victorious. That is, that they brought Israel to its knees and forced a ceasefire. That without that, it wouldn't have happened. Had Hamas not agreed, it would continue. And if beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then indeed perception is in the successful public relations of the communicator. And of course, here we're talking about looking at the details of the ceasefire itself. Because when you look at the ceasefire itself, you might actually realize, now the official ceasefire has not been made public, but those things that have been leaked, Hamas did not actually achieve any significant concessions that they had been pushing for. And yet, indeed, they're claiming victory. And the issues of central importance to Hamas have been pushed off to some further date, a discussion for a time after. That is hardly a victory. But then again, Hamas has never been accused of playing by the rules, especially when it comes to the rules of PR, public relations. And this is important. One of the most perverse examples was a still picture that Hamas presented showing an ugly, awful carnage of a family with bloodied children, a mother in the living room. When you focused on the picture, you saw that on the doorpost, there was a small white box on the upper right side of the lintel. It was a mezuzah. That didn't make sense. That couldn't be from Gaza. This was not a picture from Gaza. It wasn't a picture of Gazans being killed by an Israeli missile fire. It was actually, and this is the perverse part, a picture of a Jewish family. It was the Fogel family that was murdered on March 26, 2011, in their home in Itamar, murdered by Palestinian terrorists. The Fogel family pictures were the perfect example for Hamas's narrative. They took Israeli Jews killed by Palestinians and converted them into Gazans killed by Israelis, the bloody dead children. Hamas did not even Photoshop out the mezuzah, that box with the biblical scroll on the inside, which is a classic mark of a Jewish home. So my third answer to the question of who won is that depends on which side you're on, Israel or Hamas. You trust the truth and accuracy depending on which side you're on. The exact details of the ceasefire, as I mentioned earlier, of August 26, 2014, are somewhat still up in the air. But latest, hopefully the long-term ceasefire that we have right now, has been initiated between Israel and Hamas. And since the beginning of Protective Edge, this whole concept, the notion of a ceasefire was very important, but the details have been kept quiet. But from the leaks, we see that the following issues are important. First, Rafah, the crossing between Egypt and Gaza, will be opened. The next is that Israel will let humanitarian reconstruction materials come into Gaza. And then in 30 days from the onset, peace talks between Israel and the PA will resume. If you know this, by the way, Hamas really gains almost nothing in that issue. There are one or two elements that they do gain, but they're also minimal. Abbas and the PA have been put in charge of the reconstruction. That is part of the ceasefire agreement, which means they usurp Hamas's role as leader. Now the PA, and not Hamas, is rebuilding Gaza, doling out jobs, creating facts on the ground, and goodwill. They are buying loyalty, and they are ultimately prying it away from Hamas. That was part of the plan. Not just the ceasefire plan, but Egypt's plan. And actually, even more importantly, it was also part of Israel's plan. We're also hearing that fishing rights will be extended from 3 miles to 6 miles, and then later to 12 miles for Gaza's fishermen. And that's useful and important. But you know something? It's hardly an achievement, because in an earlier ceasefire, one of the many that was broken over the past few weeks, over the summertime, Israel had already agreed to the 12-mile fishing radius. And so this agreement begins with 6 miles, actually less than what was agreed upon and rejected earlier. Hardly a success from the point of view of Hamas. And yet, there were still huge celebrations in Gaza. After the ceasefire was announced, Hamas took to the streets to celebrate, using and flashing the V, the symbol of victory. We think of it as a symbol of peace, but it's the victory sign. They needed to show Gazans that there was a victory. So they went out to set the example and led celebrations, despite having won almost nothing. So if you're asking, what now? If you want to know how long will the ceasefire last, the answer is actually depending on Hamas's perception. Why? If Hamas feels strong enough, they will break the ceasefire, thinking that they have more to gain by shooting. However, if Hamas feels bruised and beaten, if their weapons are seriously depleted to a point where they can't fight, when they have nothing left to fight with, then the ceasefire will hold until, well, that's the question, until they rebuild their caches and restock their arsenal. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. Hamas cannot stop. Hamas is sworn to Israel's destruction. The ceasefire is simply a timeout, a time to replenish, a time to reload. 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Hamas will challenge Israel again because Hamas cannot let well enough alone. It's the central theme of their charter, and they will continue to fight until the last Hamas fighter is left standing. People have told me that they find it hard to believe that Hamas can claim such things, that it's a part of their charter. Well, there are 2 examples in the charter established in 1988 of Hamas which actually say exactly this, that they will not stop. In the preamble to the charter, Hamas says the following: the Zionist entity, which is Israel, will exist and continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. That's pretty powerful. The preamble, Article 7 of the Hamas Charter says, at the end of the article, it reads, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him.'" That's Article 7 from the Hamas Charter. The final point is one of perspective and point of view, and this is really hard to understand. From Hamas's point of view, as long as they can continue to shoot a single rocket, as long as a single fighter still is standing, who can and will continue the battle, they have won. That's their point of view. It is so different from the way in which we see things in terms of success and failure. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. The first up is an editorial from Haaretz from August 28, 2014, entitled, "Israel Must Help Gaza's Realize Full Economic Potential." Now, Haaretz is the paper of record in Israel. It's not the most read, but it is certainly the most important. It is definitely left of center and extremely critical of the current government. But Haaretz is a paper that thoughtful people must read. Even if you disagree, you have to read it. Haaretz presents serious discussions and debates about issues in Israel and about the world. It sets the agenda for a lot of debates. It raises essential points. Also, in terms of culture and arts, essentially, it is the source for topics on theater, music, literature. Haaretz is the gold standard. Haaretz can have an essay of 30,000 words on Jewish philosophy, on Buber, or on Israeli dance, or on sushi. It's unbelievable. But you have to read Haaretz, in which it's what thinkers do. This piece is an editorial, not signed, because it's an editorial. It's the statement and point of view of the editorial board. It suggests that Israel must help Gaza realize its full economic potential, and begins by saying, "We do not know who won the conflict," going back to a question that we were asking at the very beginning of our show, or even if a ceasefire is good or bad. "We will see the results only in the future," it begins to say. But then the editorial crashes down, and it gives the Prime Minister a recipe for success or failure. And here's that recipe. It reads, "Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hinted during one of his public appearances during the operation that he expects, quote, a new diplomatic horizon, unquote, will follow. He did not elaborate. Such a horizon cannot be realized without a fundamental change in perception, to the effect that only a comprehensive diplomatic process that brings an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can change the regional reality." And then it concludes, "The Gaza Strip, with its 1.8 million residents, needs not just reconstruction of its ruins, but economic development that will include sea access, an airport, and the investment of billions of dollars so that it can realize its potential for growth." Continuing, he says, or the editorial continues, "This is the approach that ought to guide the state of Israel if it wants to turn the declared ceasefire into a long-term reality." Unquote, the end. This is a very lofty objective, I'm saying. We can only hope that the proper players can assemble to accomplish it. It is a very difficult thing to accomplish, but I think it has a possibility. Next up is a column by Fareed Zakaria. It's entitled, "Second Sunni Awakening." It was published in the Washington Post September 2nd, 2014. It's a discussion of two retired diplomats, one from the United States and one from Europe. Both are in private sector now, and they are actively involved in what's going on in the world diplomatically. Fareed, for those of you who have not read him or seen him, is a very gifted thinker. Born in Mumbai, a Muslim, Yale undergraduate, Harvard PhD, was on ABC and now on CNN, twice weekly actually in his show. He's a columnist now at Time and the Washington Post. Fareed begins by setting the stage. He asks, what are the strengths of the Islamic State? I posed this question to two deeply knowledgeable observers, a European diplomat and a former official, and the picture they are painting is worrying. Although not hopeless, defeating the group would require a large and sustained strategic effort from the Obama administration, but it could be done without significant numbers of U.S. ground troops. And then he explains that the experts say that ISIS is a real threat. Fareed Zakaria then concludes in the following way. He says, once the Iraqi army is fighting again, the Americans said it should employ oil spots strategy of the surge, clearing the holding areas. But the key to that would be winning the trust of local Sunni populations. That same approach could be used in Syria with the Free Syrian Army using money and providing security to win over locals who oppose Assad but now ally with the Islamic State out of fear rather than conviction. He continues, the two observers agreed, he says, on one central danger. And this, I have to tell you, is enormously important and the most important significant part of his column. The temptation to gain immediate military victories over the Islamic State, ISIS, could mean that the United States would end up tacitly partnering with the Assad regime in Syria. This would produce a short-term military gain, but a long-term political disaster. It would feed the idea that the Sunnis are embattled and that the Crusader Christian Shiite alliance is persecuting them, and that all Sunnis must resist this alien invasion. The European diplomat said the key is that the Sunnis must be in the lead against ISIS, or IS, the Islamic State. They must be in front of the battlefield. Fareed and his experts lay out the challenge and showed a huge risk of alienating the massive Sunni populace by siding with the Shiites or a breakoff of Shia, which would be the Alawites in Syria. But as I'm saying here, and this is important, the long-term, short-term issue is critical, yes. But the real problem is ISIS. And Fareed and his experts recognize it, but don't really give a good explanation, because ISIS are Sunnis, and no one else is lining up to confront them. The Sunnis are absent. They are petrified of ISIS. So what do we do? Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. The first cartoon that I wanted to show you was by Tom Trouw, T-R-O-U-W. It's from Amsterdam, from the Netherlands. August 15th, 2014. A doctor and a patient are together, and the patient, clearly an identifiable Arab. On his belt is written, the Arabic world. All over his body is blood, and the names of countries soaked in blood. Libya, Egypt, Syria, Iraq. The doctor asks, so where does it hurt? And the Arab in the cartoon points at his heart, where a smaller but clear bloody Star of David is located. That is an extremely powerful statement, that all the blood and all the pain in the Arabic world on this particular Arab's body, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of deaths, the point that hits closest to his heart is the Israel issue. Wow. The next cartoon is by Phil Hands in the Wisconsin State Journal, August 8th, 2014. Its question really is about who really wins, connected to our earlier discussion at the very beginning of our show today. Hamas, what happens is Hamas is shouting on one side, we won, and Israel is shouting on the other side, shouting, we won. And in the rubble are two civilians in Gaza, and they're shouting, we lost. There is no doubt in this whole discussion that the biggest losers are the civilians. There are 1.8 million Gazans, only a handful of people in Hamas. The last cartoon I want to deal with today is called ISIS Coexist. And there have been a few takes on this very, very similar theme in cartoons that I found over the last few weeks. So it's dated August 22nd, 2014, in Kegel Cartoons Syndicate. Rick McKee from Aventura Chronicle actually draws it. The word actually reads Coexist, and the word is on a banner which was hanging on the wall, a red brick wall. The symbols of different religions actually compose the word. So the C is the crescent from the Muslim crescent, the O is the peace sign, the E is the male-female sign, the X is the Star of David, the I is the Wiccan sign, the S is the yin-yang, and the T is the sign of Christianity. Blood all over the Muslim cut down the banner. Okay, so the banner is left in blood on the ground, and the only thing left on the wall is the crescent, also in blood. And you see walking away from blood dripping is a Muslim with his sword dripping with blood itself. A very telling point with regard to coexistence. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. I want to think out loud with you now. Recently, in Nice, France, a 16-year-old was arrested with her recruiter, a 20-year-old. They were on their way to Turkey, and then to cross over the border into Syria and Iraq to fight. She has been dubbed Jihad Jane. Her parents didn't even know that she was leaving. She'd run away to join the battle from France. Mind-blowing. What's so mind-blowing in this whole story also is what role does she think she would have in ISIS? She was going to join the ISIS army. Now, give some context here. ISIS had actually just kidnapped 600 Yazidi girls to give and sell to ISIS soldiers in Syria. What was a 16-year-old French girl going to be doing in Syria or in Iraq? I've also been thinking about Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who made an appeal to clerics at a conference in Tehran, Iran. And get a load of this quote. This is unbelievable. So there's a conference of religious leaders, and the president of Iran comes out and he says, "Do not close out the world." That's a quote, unquote. He asked religious leaders to be more open to the internet and to science, because Iran needs the youth to be the cutting edge in these fields in the future. He actually said to them, if we cut out the internet, we have to create some sort of relationship with it. If we cut out the internet, I know you're afraid, he said, that it's going to cause moral degradation in our society. But if we don't have that internet, we will not have scientists in the future to defend Iran from the outside world. So we need the internet. A fascinating point of view, and a very, very important one at that. We have to wait to see what will happen in Iran with regard to the clerics and the internet itself. We've thought out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, tell me what you've been thinking. You can email me at micah@shalomtv.com. You could tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one picante piece of information. Did you know that there are, broadly speaking, two strokes of Jews? There are Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews come from Europe, and Sephardi Jews come from North Africa. But that's not really what the words mean. Ashkenaz is a medieval Hebrew word, which actually means Germany, the epicenter of that culture. Ashkenaz, Germany, but not really German. Today it just means European Jews. Sfaradim actually means, in Hebrew, Sfarad, which means Spain, the epicenter of that culture, which then emanated into North Africa. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on Shalom TV.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.